Yes, we have an awesome guest, Mark Griskey, joining us for the very first time to talk about his contributions to video games, to movies, and music in general, and of course, as we all love, Star Wars. Welcome to the show, Mark Griskey.
How's it going, man?
It's going well. We're in Utah where it's nice and hot.
Well, it's pretty hot here in SoCal. Not as hot, I would imagine, but Southern California and the San Fernando Valley, we live in a desert. People don't know it because there's swimming pools in the backyard, but we do.
Not that those swimming pools are full of water anymore, but
No, I mean, I'll be honest, mine is, but like I stopped watering the lawn at this point, and I'm holding out on the pool.
Just so you know, I have my brother-in-law Caleb here. He's a music composition major, so we've had him sit on was, I think the last one he sat on was Sam Hewlick. So he asks questions that I wouldn't think about, but
Cool.
he's gonna be listening on, probably taking notes, asking questions when he needs to.
Great. So you're a comp major? What's your main instrument?
My main instrument's trombone.
Awesome, man. Composer Gordy Hobb.
I don't know if I've heard of him.
He's one of the guys that worked on The Old Republic. And I met him through because we had ended up having 5 composers on that. And he's a trombone player as well, an excellent arranger and an excellent composer. I think it's nice to have, all composers pretty much have some sort of main instrument, but it's nice to have variety. My composer friends, some of them have woodwind backgrounds, some of them have brass backgrounds. I'm a percussionist, so I have a classical percussion performance degree from Cal State Northridge, and I'm a jazz drummer and a fusion drummer, or used to be. Now I just write music and I play the computer for a living. So.
Where you just talked about the Old Republic, and there's 5+ people working on music with that one. We've talked to Jesse Harlan before, who I guess is the supervisor, the boss over all of you all, I think, as far as music goes. But when you work with a game such as the Old Republic, where you have hundreds and hundreds of hours of music, what is the composition process like when you have to literally work with tons of people to make sure everything's covered, but at least make sure it all sounds cohesive?
Yeah, it's interesting. Collaborating, sharing of ideas with different composers. I mean, I think in general, composing is sort of like a reclusive loner kind of occupation. we're generally like hidden away in our dark little studios, working on the music and everything. It's not until you come to the scoring date that the musicians are there and you're recording it, you're interacting with other people. But on some of these larger projects, we're just physically, we need to have more than one person writing music just to get the job done. It was interesting, I think, for all of us to explore that collaboration process. For Tor particularly, I think it was extremely successful, and our approach was to basically share ideas. It wasn't like, oh, wait till they hear my, cool thing here. I'm going to show them how great of a composer it was. We were very much a team, although for the big picture, we were a team. The individual cues were primarily written by one composer. But for example, if Lenny Moore came up with a main theme for Yoda's planet that was sort of based on Yoda's theme from the movies, and then I was writing a cue that would somehow reference Yoda in it, I used Lenny's theme to make it cohesive, and vice versa. I mean, a lot of my role on that was actually coming up with main themes for characters, and many of us came up with main themes for locations that sort of got divided between everybody. But like, you know, I'm doing like the Smuggler's theme. If you're playing the Smuggler, I'm doing like the Sith theme, that sort of stuff. And then we sort of divided the planets. This was all on a spreadsheet. Everyone could hear mock-ups that we were creating that were in progress. That way we can contact each other and say, hey, you know, somebody's like, oh, you know, there's like a Sith presence on this level here. Can I get a copy of your Sith theme because I want to incorporate it into what I'm doing? So in a nutshell, that's how it worked. It was sort of divide and conquer to get the work done, but it was also sharing at the same time with a spirit of collaboration.
And if I recall right, I believe Jesse said that when we were coming up with the main theme for the game, that's you did. I believe you're the one who did Clash of Destiny, while his Shaking in the Mountain didn't quite make it in as the main theme, but they used it later. When it came to the main theme of the game, the credits theme, was that he made it sound like it was a competition? Who got theirs in there? But it might be because he said he got you for the Force Unleashed theme, and it was sort of a revenge for you. But what was it like to make the main theme, the credits theme, the main menu theme for that game, which I believe is Clash of Destiny?
Yeah, Clash of Destiny was the name that Jesse actually finally came up with. Yeah, it's just funny. I mean, the approval process. I mean, with a big project like that, the amount of money that's being put into it, the fact that it's BioWare, it's LucasArts that's involved, it's, you know, people that are on staff, like Jesse on staff with Lucas as a music supervisor and composer on the project as well. Myself as a contractor. It's just funny. It's like somewhere down the chain, I think there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and not us by us composers. You know, it was coming from somewhere else, and I won't even guess where. Where, you know, everyone kind of has an opinion about music. So, you know, I wrote this main theme. You know, I probably did a couple of sketches that got shot down or something. I don't recall really, but I think I like suddenly went, oh, this is it with Clash of Destiny. And I sent it to Jesse and he said, yeah, it sounds great. And he sent it off, and then it was really BioWare that came back and said, we think we like it, but can you give us some other options? And then I think, you know, everyone given that opportunity, I don't blame them for saying, well, I'll throw my hat in the ring. You know, Jesse's like, well, I got an idea, you know, and Will Roger's like, well, I have an idea. So it was decided that, hey, we'll, you know, give them two other options. They'll have three, they'll pick one. And so they did so, and they ended up picking mine at the end. And there was no hard feelings, and it wasn't, I mean, there's a friendly competition that happens. I mean, you can't be a composer and not have a strong, I wouldn't say ego from like a narcissist standpoint. I would say ego from a strong sense of what you're able to do and what the direction you want to go with. You can't be wishy-washy with it, you know, especially if you're coming up with a big dramatic main theme. It's like you're going to feel passionate about it. But there was no hard feelings or anything like that. If there was a competition at all, it was a friendly competition. And it was just funny that at the end of the day, the first real theme that I said, okay, this is it, you know, ended up being the final theme. Although we did go back and make some revisions a year later because the game was delayed for so long. They had a chance to listen to it again and decided to make some changes. And we went back in, and there was some back and forth trying to figure out exactly what changes they wanted. But I think in the end, the final version that's in the game, I'm extremely happy with. So
It's probably the most well, it's easily the most recognizable theme in the game, just because it's the one you get whenever you turn on the game. But it is a very good theme, and it very much captures the spirit of what that game is trying to tell. So,
well, yeah.
So, from what we know of your credits, you pretty much started with LucasArts projects and worked with them a lot until they no longer exist anymore. How did you first get involved with LucasArts? I know you started with, it says you started with Obi-Wan and then Racer Revenge, Jedi Starfighter, and Gladius, which I've talked to you about. How did you get first involved with LucasArts? How did you get noticed by them?
Strangely enough, I answered a want ad. they there was a bunch of, in a nutshell, and there's a long history of music with LucasArts, and even back in the day when it was Lucasfilm Games, and there's legends in the industry like Peter McConnell and Clint Bajakian, um, that all were composers that were on staff, but kind of doing everything, and they were sort of dividing the work between. It was a smaller company, it was a smaller tight knit thing. The company got larger and everything like that. I think for whatever reason, oh yeah, Michael Land, of course. Sorry, I didn't want to leave Michael out. Was the other sort of trio of composers there, and Clint and Michael, sorry, Peter and Michael decided to go off on an entrepreneurial adventure and leave LucasArts, and Clint decided for different reasons, maybe it was time for a change. So suddenly they had no staff composers, is what I'm trying to say here. After having like 3 very talented, very prolific composers, they had this music vacuum. So they put basically a one ad, so to speak, in Gama Sutra, which is the game site all devoted to kind of the business of games and that sort of thing. But and I was living in Southern California at the time and attempting to break into film and television and doing some work there, some orchestration and some part prep and writing music for lower budget, sort of projects. But the game industry was sort of taking off and technology was taking off and budgets were getting bigger. So it was like, wow, I think if I can get into the game industry, not only do I really enjoy games and everything, I think that, they're going to, in the future, have these big budgets to record big orchestras and everything, instead of just using the little, chip sounds that were on board. And I was in the right place at the right time, I think, to be looking for something like that. So anyway, I just answered their, submitted a resume, and I had to go through this very formal kind of corporate thing where they wouldn't listen to any of my music until they saw the resume, and then I had to have a cover letter and all this sort of stuff. And then they flew me up a couple times, and I interviewed in person twice, and then I wrote some custom music for them. And I would say it was at least a good 3+ months between the time I contacted them and then they offered me a job. And so it was a full-time staff position, and it meant moving to Northern California. And so it was definitely a pivotal point in my career. Am I going to do this, or am I going to stay here in LA and in Hollywood and become, a film, famous film composer? And I decided to take the opportunity to do the staff position with Lucas. And so the games that you were citing, some of my earlier ones, Racer's Revenge, I just did music editing on. I might have written a little bit of music for their main logo or something like that. And that was fine, just to kind of get my feet wet. And then there was Jedi Starfighter 2, where half the music was kind of edited Williams music and half was my own original composition, but no live instruments. It's all computer generated stuff. And then for Gladius, I pushed really hard to actually record live music. And so we went up to Seattle, Washington and recorded a big brass section and incorporated that into the score. And so by the time we got to KOTOR 2, I was able to convince, not that I needed to convince, well, I did need to convince, it's a lot of money to spend on a big orchestra. I said, let's do Star Wars right. This is an important game. Let's do this. And we recorded a huge orchestra, 80-piece orchestra for that title. So, that was the early days. I think it was really great that I had the experience to be on staff and sort of see how the whole game development process works, what the artists are doing, going to these team meetings and stuff like that, and understanding what everyone's role was and how games are made. So that helped me a lot in my freelance career. But the flip side is going to all those meetings is like you spend all your time in meetings. So when I saw the opportunity, I think it was in 2004, they were doing a restructuring of the company, I decided to basically volunteer to be laid off, because that way I would have it's a little bit of a severance package, a little bit of money. Hey, we're laying you off. We need to lay off a bunch of people. Ooh, lay me off. I'll become freelance. And so I did, and continued to work with them on a freelance role pretty much until the company was shut down.
There's a couple questions that listeners have asked that you touched on. The first one is we just talked about KOTOR 2. They want to know how much of Jeremy Soul's score from the first one did you use as influence for the second one? And as they said, how hard was it to fill his shoes, as probably whoever does Elder Scroll 5 is going to have a hard time filling after Skyrim happened?
Well, Jeremy's a super talented guy. We've never sat down and had a conversation. I've never really met him. I have the highest respect for his music. And he's several years younger than me. He was like a guy that just sort of rocketed into this, like, the big leagues at a pretty young age. And, doors open for different people at different times in their life. So more power to him, a guy that just sort of rocketed into this, like, the big leagues at a pretty young age. And, doors open for different people at different times in their life. So more power to him, a guy that just sort of rocketed into this, like, the big leagues at a pretty young age. And, doors open for different people at different times in their life. So more power to him, times in their life. So more power to him. I honestly, for KOTOR 2, I did not really worry about what Jeremy did very much. I just tried to, a guy that just sort of rocketed into this, like, the big leagues at a pretty young age. And, doors open for different people at different times in their life. So more power to him. Established a theme, it's different from the John Williams stuff from the film. For here, I'll use that. But like any of the battle music that I wrote for KOTOR 2 and all the planet themes and everything, that was just me. If I was borrowing from anyone, it was from John Williams. And yeah, I mean, the RPG thing is interesting. I think Jeremy does a really great job, with the Elder Scrolls and all that sort of stuff. And, my only real experience with it is KOTOR 2. I'd love to do more. If there's any video producers out there that want to hire somebody that loves to do RPGs, I'm your guy. But yes, did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. So you mentioned how you draw on John Williams for that one, and of course Jedi Starfighter and the other ones you were arranging and working with John Williams' music. But right in the middle of all these Star Wars games, you've mentioned that you have Gladius, where you got to do recorded live music. Where did you draw on for Gladius, and how different was the challenge of composing for a Roman gladiator game versus Star Wars, which is so famous with a certain type of sound and feel?
I would have to say there was probably less pressure with Gladius. Here's a kind of a new franchise, and like, what does Roman gladiator music sound like? Well, just watch some old Hollywood movies. I think I was vibing Conan the Barbarian more than, Spartacus or something like that, in terms of what composers do. And, here's the thing. I mean, there's cliches, and it's not bad to be a cliche. Instead of calling it a cliche, there's certain musical devices you can use to evoke certain moods. So you think big gladiatorial arena combat, guys in armor with the feathered caps and, some, mythical creatures and stuff might be, part of the battle too. And immediately it was like, I need to have a huge brass section. It's all about French horns here, and a big trombone section and fanfare type of stuff, but also just dark, heavy. So that's what I used as sort of my sound palette, so to speak, for that score. And like I said, I probably listened to, checked out some classic movies, but there, you don't want to try to do textbook. Well, here's what the actual music of Rome sounded like at the time. Um, First of all, we don't know because there was, little documentation. There wasn't actual written notation, as far as I know, for Roman music. I guess the Greeks had some very primitive stuff, but no one knows what it's supposed to sound like. Um, there's probably some artwork that shows what the instruments are. Um, it probably would sound, if you listen to the actual authentic music, kind of small compared to, what a modern brass instrument sounds like and the abilities of modern brass instrument, and then being able to use a big brass section. And by big, I mean, I think it was 15 or 16 brass. And that's all we recorded because they didn't have much of a budget. That's all we recorded live. Everything else was samples. And I used lots of ethnic percussion, being a percussionist, just evocative stuff, just something that would sound exotic. And there was various locations, so here's the desert sort of Middle Eastern looking location, and it's going to have a different, you might want to hint at some Middle Eastern music there. Here's the classic Roman stuff here. In the north, it was before the Lord of the Rings films, just before the Lord of the Rings films, when that game came out. But it was very much, this is the land of men, very much like they're portrayed in Tolkien's fantasy there. And so I don't know how to define what that is. Really, the difference between like, okay, well, this is more of a Western tradition, and the Roman as opposed to Eastern.
See, and it looks like you have a love of brass section. If the soundtracks I know of yours are right, because with the Old Republic, with Force Unleashed, I believe with Marvel Ultimate Alliance, there's a really heavy brass, heavy horns, I guess, would be the more specific. Um, do you really like working with brass? And also, you said you're percussion is your focus. What's one of your scores that you've done that you've felt you've really been able to do, see, percussion justice? Like, where you feel you're able to show what percussion can do, being that a lot of people don't usually notice everything percussion can do.
Well, I'll bypass the brass section question for a second and answer the latter first. Yeah, as a percussionist, it was sort of a double-edged sword for me. Here's the thing: is you're always up against fighting for a budget. No one's just going to hand you, here's $500,000 just for musicians. Go give us something great, unless they really feel confident that their money is being well spent. I mean, it's not cheap to bring in an 80-piece orchestra to Skywalker Sound and people that are excellent sight readers, paying the union rate and everything. So oftentimes, the budget would be out of the question, depending on, by the time it got to me, I didn't have much say in it. If I felt like, wow, they really want to spend money on this, and then I could fight for a larger one. So back to the percussion question, oftentimes I would go, well, I'm a percussionist. I have all these sample libraries. I really know how to make them sound very realistic playing the instrument. If I'm going to cut corners, I'm going to cut corners in percussion because I'm the percussionist. I'll just do that, all the samples. But when it came to the Williams stuff, John Williams is such an excellent composer, with everything, but his use of percussion is just phenomenal. I mean, and I found out later that his entire family, they're all percussionists. His brother, Don Williams, plays on all his scores, and he's like, first call percussionist, timpani player, mallet player here in Los Angeles. I believe John Williams' father was a drummer, percussionist. There's just a lot of percussion in the family, So even though that wasn't John's instrument, his writing for it was just phenomenal. And I thought it was just part of that sound. So that's when I really started upping the size of the percussion. You know, started with, well, we need to have a live timpani in the room, you know, because that sounds so good blended with the brass as opposed to using timpani samples. I knew what sounded more realistic and what sounded less realistic being a percussion player. Also mallet instruments, you know, I think all those mallet sample libraries out there, they sound fine, but they don't really sound like a mallet section the way it blends with the orchestra. But as I went down this road, pretty soon it became a bigger and bigger percussion section, and then a bigger trucks loaded in all this equipment because they have to load in the day before, and literally it's a giant truck bringing all this in. So I'm writing for vibraphone, marimba, you know, a huge marimba range, making sure that it goes down into the bass marimba so we don't have to have two, xylophone, crotales, orchestra bells, chimes, big timpani array, and then all the battery percussion, you know, several snare drums, you know, just bring all the cymbals you guys own. And they loved it once they got to know that I was a percussionist too, and that I was going to write some stuff that they'd have fun playing. It was, you know, they show up to the day with a big smile on their face because they knew they weren't just going to be hitting a giant cymbal crash and a bass drum hit. You know, they were going to have some challenging parts. And I did the same thing with harp. Harp on a lot of scores, you don't hear harp in big film scores. You don't hear a lot of woodwinds. You know, it's, you know, these big action scores. It's sort of that Hans Zimmer sound that's, you know, huge string section, and it's layered. There's lots of brass. There's layered drum loops and everything. John Williams really knew how to write for harp, or knows how to write for harp. I made sure that we had live harp and that it was recorded very well, so it would be very clear and upfront in the score, and that there would be very intricate harp parts, you know, incorporated in there.
Okay, I'm gonna take a slight break myself, so my brother-in-law can ask questions from the
It was recorded very well, so it would be very clear and upfront in the score, and that there would be very intricate harp parts, you know, incorporated in there.
Okay, I'm gonna take a slight break myself, so my brother-in-law can ask questions from the
Oh, the old how does one break into the business question, really. To answer your question, yes, I make a nice living. You know, when you're involved in the entertainment industry, it's not as clear cut as if, you know, if I decided to be an accountant or something like that. I think it'd be a little easier to predict. Here's where I'm cut is if, you know, if I decided to be an accountant or something like that. I think it'd be a little easier to predict. Here's where I'm starting. Here's where, you know, my practice is this big. Sort of a linear progression that can be made on bigger projects, and then there's quiet spells in between. And if being a freelancer as a creative individual, anyone doing anything creative, you know, whether it's an artist or a writer or an actor, composer, you just have to be able to feel comfortable with that and kind of roll with it, because it's not, I never feel secure. I mean, I feel like maybe it'll just end tomorrow, and, you know, they'll go, oh, you know, Mark Griskey, he's too old and washed up. We want the young guy, you know. And so far that hasn't happened yet. You know, hopefully it won't. John Williams is doing fine for an older guy, but then again, he's a super genius from outer space or something. You know, his abilities are beyond mortal men. But to answer your question in a more less snarky way, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, I think if you stick with it, but to answer your question in a more less snarky way, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, I think if you stick with it, it's not that crazy to decide to do a career doing what I'm doing. And for me, it's been successful. You know, I've been able to raise a family and you know, live in nice houses and got a boat in the driveway and I drive a Porsche. I don't know. It's all fine, but I'm not, you know, some mega millionaire guy. You know, that's a whole different league. I mean, I think that, and there's some people in the entertainment industry that it's just crazy, the difference between, you know, what someone would consider making a good living is, you know. I don't know if that I don't know if that answered it, and maybe you should edit that because I don't want to.
No, that was good.
I don't want to. I don't want to like necessarily broadcast my, hey, I've got a boat and a Porsche, so I'm doing okay.
You want us to take the boat? No.
So do you feel it's more secure? Like you said that you like never really feel financially completely stable because it could like end tomorrow. But like, did you feel more stable working as a staff in your early video game composing days, or do you feel more stable as a freelance composer?
Well, certainly, if you can find a staff position in the music industry, they're few and far between. These are rare positions. There's not many of them. It's just not the norm. Most of it is contract work. They might have on-staff audio people. It's very rare they have on-staff composers. So in terms of stability, yes, I think being on staff is a much more stable situation. The trade-off, in my experience, is financially it's kind of night and day what you make as a contractor, a staff person. You're trading. It's risk equals reward. If you know anything about investing in the stock market, it's like, you know, you're not going to make a ton of money doing something without taking some. I experienced both at various parts of my career, both with Lucas and Disney. I spent 3.5 years and recently left Disney. I was working as senior composer for Disney Publishing Worldwide and just decided that I wanted to go back to freelance. It was a better fit for me, you know, but that's a personal decision for anyone. And like I said, these staff positions are few and far between. So I would say I would advise anyone that might be offered something like that to consider it quite seriously, at least for a period of time. I think that's what it was for me. It's like being on staff at Lucas and knowing that I'm going to get a paycheck every week allowed me not to worry about trying to hustle so much, although I was freelancing quite a bit at the time. I was freelance. I was working every weekend and every evening. But, you know, at least I can go into that job and just learn from it and see what the business was like and understanding game design and everything like that. And then when I felt like, you know what, I think I'm in a better position to just go freelance, you know, choose your exit strategy is what I would say in a position like that. Because honestly, what happens with these corporate positions is the only way you can move up in your career is to stop actually creating content, to stop actually being a creative person and move into management. I mean, it's the only way you're going to get a raise. It's the only way you're going to move up the corporate ladder is to become a supervisor or manager. That's how the corporate world works. Or if you're an external contractor, I think you can still be deeply involved in the creative process and sell your creative assets, you know, what you're able to bring to the table for them. Suddenly it has a value of its own, you know? So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know if I'm glad that I got a glimpse of the corporate world, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, I did enjoy everyone I worked with, but it was just a better fit for me to just go back to freelance. So I'm rolling the dice, and I'm back here freelancing and hoping that when I'm finished my current project that, you know, I get an email for the next one and it continues. But there's no guarantee. But there's no guarantee if you're on staff either. You know, I mean, see what's happening with. I mean, look at LucasArts. I thought they would be there forever. I mean, it was out of the blue that Disney bought out Lucas. I mean, we were all just stunned. You know, just like what? Who knew this? You know.
And also, another question I had was, I guess, early in your composing career, so when you first started writing, like not necessarily when you were on staff or anything like that, like way before that, how important would you say it is to have like high quality, expensive samples for your computer generated music?
Okay, so yeah. Unfortunately, now it's even more important than ever. And it was important when my career started, and that was many years ago, and the bar was lower. You can get away with maybe a little more. Well, we couldn't go into a recording facility and record this. But now it's like, well, don't you have a computer with a bunch of sample libraries? Of course, everyone can make it sound like an orchestra on their computer. So I highly recommend that composers not sell, production quality short by any means. No one's going to read into your intent of a composition if it recommend that composers not sell, production quality short by any means. No one's going to read into your intent of a composition if it's not realized in his arts. He's a trained composer. I was in a role of creating music and he was music supervising and maybe writing a few cues or something, depending on how busy he was, I could get away with sending him a mock-up of what it's going to sound like, knowing that we're going to record it live later. And he knew the difference between, oh, well, this is going to sound great when it's live. And okay, he didn't spend too much time messing with the samples here. I didn't have to sell it to him. But if it was a client that didn't really understand that, you really have to put a lot of time into your mock-ups and make it sound as good as you can. And then to more specifically answer your question, if you're trying to send your demo out there and get work, I would say it's better to, it's quality over quantity. I would trim down your demo and just put 4 of your best tracks on there that not only compositionally, but are produced really well, rather than here's the whole variety of what I can do. But, we didn't really have a lot of great equipment for that one. And you get the idea here because they don't get the idea. So you have to invest into it. Now, I went into credit card debt early in my career because I felt that was important. I just said, well, if I'm going to compete, I need these sample libraries. And just, I don't recommend going into credit card debt to anyone, but it was just sort of, again, using a business analogy here, you have to spend money to make money.
That answer your question?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Okay, so we're gonna bounce back to me with some more about the stuff you've done. So you did the score for The Force Unleashed, which a lot of us remember when that was coming out. It was the big game, the game that George Lucas himself, came up with a story with. They got the full mocap. It was a huge Star Wars game, and this was your 5th or 6th Star Wars game. What was the difference composing for a game like that versus the previous projects you've done, if there was any? Being that it was, I don't know, I'm quite sure LucasArts spent a lot more on that game than they had on previous games.
Well, yeah, I think I alluded to the fact before that with my my career in games and through LucasArts, I started by essentially editing John Williams music, which means just taking the music and finding sections that will work in various parts of the game and making sure that they loop properly. There's some, it's more technical, it's creative in that you're, understanding, you're selecting something with the right emotional impact and everything like that. But my goal was let's record an original score with a big orchestra and, let's do a Star Wars orchestra for a Star Wars game. But my goal was I went from editing John Williams music to doing sample only composing in the style of John Williams to, finally recording that first score for KOTOR 2. But I guess the big difference with TFU was it was this new franchise, with KOTOR 2, even though my music, I think, was, as I mentioned before, I wasn't really basing it off of Jeremy Soul's music from the first game, unless it was, it made sense to do so. It was clear that, like, oh, this is an important thing. We should definitely incorporate that. With TFU, it was a blank slate, so to speak. So there was nothing else to look at. There was other than, okay, Mark, go sound like John Williams. And they didn't necessarily want me to ape John Williams, but you can't get too far away from that musical vocabulary when you're doing Star Wars. But here we have a game that's based on the extended universe and takes place with this whole, like you said, original storyline and characters that aren't in the film. The lead character in the game, particularly Starkiller. So there was a lot of pressure on me. So it was definitely extremely exciting and extremely stressful at the same time. It's one of those things where you're just going, this is awesome. And then, you wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh no, what am I going to do? It's like, they're going to find out I can't do this. It's all that self-doubt stuff. It never goes away. I was watching Jon Stewart last night. He's doing his final broadcast, I guess, tonight. And he was talking to Louis C.K. about that. I love lots of comedians, by the way. That self-doubt thing just never goes away. It doesn't matter how successful you are. I mean, maybe if you're a big businessman, I won't. Okay, Donald Trump. Maybe he doesn't have self-doubt. Most of us mere mortals have self-doubt. So, TFU was extremely exciting, extremely stressful. I felt like there was a lot of pressure on me. And every job it's a high pressure business. It's really high pressure. If you're going to go in and spend the type of money that they're spending on these, you can't just go in and say, well, we were hoping it came out better. It's like if you hired a contracting crew to completely remodel your house and spent all this money on it, you don't want to come in and say, well, this looks all shoddy. So in terms of the musical experience though itself, it was fun for me I kind of felt like I had a certain amount of freedom though, because it wasn't like we were doing the video game tie-in to episode 3 or something. These are characters that aren't in the film, for the most part. Here's some different locations. Here's a different storyline. So I got to do something original for that, and it was a lot of fun. I think everybody that was involved in the production of the game really loved the music. I loved working with everybody at Lucas. Jesse Harlan wrote a fantastic main theme for it that we incorporated throughout the franchise, and there's another piece of collaboration. He wrote the essence of the main theme, and then I took part of it verbatim and then developed it and wrote a whole new B section and then added something onto the end, and that's what finally ended up in the game. It kind of modulates from this minor key into a major key and then comes back. And then within the game itself, there's some battle sequences where I took his main theme, Starfighter theme as we call it, and incorporated it into some action music. And again, I felt like it was fun collaboration. And at the end of the day, the audio is there to support the gameplay experience, and the music is there to support the emotion of the game. And I think we were successful at that. Unfortunately, the franchise didn't have legs after TFU 2, which is another story that I'm not even sure what the details are. That's out of my realm of experience. But it was very fun working on both those projects, and particularly the first one that came out.
We've had other composers on. One we've talked about a few times was Tommy Tallarico, who does video games live and has done music,
and particularly the first one that came out.
We've had other composers on. One we've talked about a few times was Tommy Tallarico, who does video games live and has done music for a long time. I mean, he talks all the time in his tours about the journey video games have made musically from back in the day when people just thought all they were midis, and well, they were, and that the music was just, no one really, the main general public didn't really care about the music of video games, as opposed to now when we have video game music winning Grammys, like the Civilization 4 thing was Christopher Tin, and Journey getting nominated and so on. Being a composer yourself, what has the journey been like from when you started to now, when video games have definitely grown more in the public eye when it comes to music, with soundtracks being more available, people buying the MP3s, awards being given to video game music, and video game music actually being recognized as, holy cow, this is an actual good score. What has the journey been like for you as a composer to see that evolution and the work you do come into the spotlight?
Well, it's to be honest with you, part of it has been a very different experience from Mr. Tallarico, who I know and love, and frustrating for me. And the reason being is they don't release. I've done a lot of films that are tie-ins to franchises, and even if it's something like The Force Unleashed, which isn't based on an actual film, right? It's not like, here's the video game based on the film. This is extended universe stuff. But I have done some for Disney. I did a Chronicles of Narnia game that I just love my score to death. And they released, when the Narnia, it was the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe film came out. So this was a tie-in, right, to the film, but they made a gameplay experience and I wrote the music. They released a soundtrack for the film. They released, like, I want to say 2 or 3 other, like, inspired by Narnia soundtracks with pop musicians and stuff for some reason, and they never released the video game score. None of my video game scores have ever been released. They're not available on iTunes. The only releases that we've been able to get away with is, like, if you get the collector's edition of The Old Republic, it comes with a CD, in there, but they don't sell it separately. So I'm not able to submit any of my music to win a Grammy because there's no album. You can't submit it if there's no album. I was actually asked by someone to step in and speak on or go to these meetings on the board of the directors for Grammys, NARAS, the local chapter. And I said, I don't qualify. And they're like, oh, sure, you just have to have a couple of, soundtrack releases. And I'm going, I've got 0. So, I don't want to sound bitter here, but it's interesting because, first of all, I'm 100% behind it. I think it's awesome. I'm super proud and very excited for any of my peers that are out there, Tommy Tallarico, spreading the news to the masses, doing video games live. More power to them. I'm 110% behind it. It's just funny. My little niche in this world of games, it's something where I keep going, well, can I do that? Can I present my, and it hasn't happened for me yet. Hopefully down the road, at some point, I'll work on a project where that will be a possibility that I could release a soundtrack and get it out there. And I even talked to Tommy about getting some of my music on video games live. And it just was, once Lucas and Disney lawyers get involved, it's really hard to make that sort of stuff happen. And I think it's easier if you, it's not easier, but I guess it is. If there's an original franchise, if it's a franchise where it's an original game, the music isn't tied into a larger picture, like Star Wars. I mean, it's Star Wars. Of course, the lawyers are going to be really concerned about anyone doing any sort of thing Star Wars. It needs to be signed off on the highest level. This goes up to the top of the company, So it's not just like, hey, can I release a soundtrack? Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We'll make a couple bucks off of it. No, it goes, this is high-powered attorneys in the Oval Office, so to speak, of the corporation that decide this sort of stuff. But to answer your question in a more positive way, I'm super excited about it. I love the fact that I've seen this happen during my career, that there is more acceptance of this. There's more, there's more respect given to video game composers. There's more of a forum for them to present their music on this larger scale. they deserve all those awards they got. I hope there's more for everyone coming down the road.
Okay, so we're going to begin wrapping this up with just a couple questions left. One thing on your credits, at least on Moby Games and so on, it says special thanks for Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, the video game, and Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. And I know Prince Caspian you compose music for. What does that special thanks actually mean when it comes to your credits?
I didn't know I had those.
on Moby Games, that's what Jesse told us to always look for composers. Yeah, on the bottom it says special thanks for Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, the video game, and Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian.
Well, Lego Pirates of the Caribbean is interesting because I did not work on that game, as far as I know, Lego Pirates of the Caribbean. I was contacted by the developer. What's the name of the developer? They're in London, not Telltale, it's Traveler's Tales, or more helped me out with some additional music on that, but I wrote most of the music for that one. So the Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I was contacted by them and said, hey, at the last minute, we need some help with music, we think. And I said, more help me out with some additional music on that, but I wrote most of the music for that one. So the Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I was contacted by them and said, hey, at the last minute, we need some help with music, we think. And I said, the Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I was contacted by them and said, hey, at the last minute, we need some help with music, we think. And I said, I'm available, and it fell through. So maybe that's what that was about. Hey, thanks for being there for me. More help me out with some additional music on that, but I wrote most of the music for that one. So the Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I was contacted by them and said, hey, at the last minute, we need some help with music, we think. And I said, more help me out with some additional music on that, but I wrote most of the music for that one. So the Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I was contacted by them and said, hey, at the last minute, we need some help with music, we think. And I said,
this one's, I guess, pretty basic. What are you currently working on? I'm assuming, since the game's not done yet, are you still working on the massive compositions needed for the Old Republic that Jesse seems to be working on every day?
No, I'm not working on the Old Republic very much at all since LucasArts shut down. Basically, Jesse lost his position as music supervisor, and they were able to essentially make him the go-to guy for all music for tour, which is great. And that's the way it should be. So now that he doesn't have his music supervisor responsibilities and his corporate stuff to do there, he's got more time to focus on the composition. Therefore, they need less of me. So I'm kind of out of work there. I did help Jesse out on a few projects. He calls me up from time to time, and it'll be a small amount of music of, I'm doing this level, and, do you have time to do 8 minutes of music for me or something like that? And the answer is always yes. And I love doing it. So I'm hoping to do more. Ongoing, I've been working on, there's a project that's going to be released. So it was announced at E3, called Relics of Gods. And this is a huge project that's for the mobile market, but we recorded a huge orchestra at Skywalker Sound for it. So it's just amazing that the amount of money that they're able to put into this, because they believe in the technology and the future of the platform and everything. So I'm super excited about that. I don't have too many details. I don't think I should talk about too many details, because I'm not sure how much has been announced, but the game itself has been announced. Relics of Gods, original game, player versus player for most of the part, where you team up, 3 against 3, 6 against 6. And very much fantasy, adventure, epic storyline, and a developer that no one's ever heard of before is coming out with this. So that's all I can say on that title. And then I'm continuing to do work for Marvel Heroes, the MMO. So I think an expansion pack is coming out here soon that I'm going to work on. And now that I'm back in Los Angeles, I'm thinking about looking for some opportunities to work on some independent films and maybe even get into some TV stuff. Basically, I love composing music for media, and I'm not, even though my career took off as a game composer, I love composing music for media, and I'm not, even though my career took off as a game composer to the point where I really had no time to do anything else. Now I think maybe, hopefully I'll have some time, because I would like to do some TV and some film and experience what that's like as well.
So last question is one we always ask every guest. We're going to give you the soapbox to promote your websites, how people can contact you, your work, where people can listen to your work, find you, stalk you at. But we'll give you the soapbox to promote yourself.
All right, the soapbox. Griskey is a very uncommon last name. If you Google my name, if you Google Mark Griskey, you'll find me on the internet. I don't, I'm pretty much a person-to-person type of guy. I'm not like somebody who does a lot of public speaking and out there promoting a show or putting on my own, music live concert or something. But if you do want to see what I'm up to, and now that you put me on the spot here, I need to update www.griskey.com. And that's kind of where I'll be posting stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on and talking to us, and hopefully Relic of the Gods gets you a soundtrack.
So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for being on and giving us an hour. And you said you were composing before, so I guess now you're going to return to slaving away at the composing.
Yeah, I've got everything else off my plate this morning. And that's how it is, like every day. You don't just walk in the studio and write music all day. It's like, I got to check my email. I got to follow up with this. I got to, shit, I forgot to make the car payment. And then I get into the studio. And so I'm just working on a little side project for Google, which is a fun company to work with in terms of the silly little projects they have me doing. But it's nothing to speak of. A few minutes of music, but just right when I was ready, and it's not your fault or anything, but of course, just right when you were ready to talk to me was when all of a sudden the light bulbs were clicking off in my head. And I was like, oh, it needs to do this. It needs to do that. That's what I was like, hang on a second, hang on. So I could sketch it out, So I'm going to go and try to finish up some of that this evening. And Relics of Gods is going to be keeping me busy 7 days a week, I'm pretty sure, for the next couple of months, and that's going to wrap out my summer. And Relics of Gods is going to be keeping me busy 7 days a week, I'm pretty sure, for the next couple of months, and that's going to wrap out my summer, and then hopefully I can take a fall vacation. That's the plan. So if I make it to Utah, I'll look you folks up, and vice versa if you're down here in LA.
Well, I do have lots of family in Southern California, so we do go there from time to time.
Cool. Well, hey, have a great evening, guys. Thanks so much.
You too, and I hope you get all those ideas down before they're completely gone.
They could be gone now, but it's okay. New ones pop in, so thanks.
Thank you for being on. Have a good day.
All right. Bye.